is revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. It is Monday. Thanks for joining me today. Have over 41 headlines to cover in the next hour or so. Thanks for joining me today. It is April 4th, Monday. Happy Monday. Was going to have some clips from yesterday's Talking Heads, but that will not be happening today. I'm trying to recover from a long weekend of work and pleasure, some pleasure. And so I'm a little discombobulated, not news to you guys. But let's delve into the news. The top stories today are Trump and the U.S. military announce Operation Freedom or Project Freedom to escort shipping out of the Strait of Hormuz. Now that has got off to a sort of rocky start. We're going to talk about that as well. Also, since my hiatus, I guess you could say, Alex Jones's Infowars, which has been on the air for 27 years or so, the website and the affiliated networks, banned out videos, etc., have been shuttered, apparently by the Onion, the leftists, the Democrats, and the others that said that it is perfectly just to be Alex Jones was asked to pay $1.5 billion to the families of Sandy Hook, and they're not really interested in the money, just in shutting him down, for saying things that weren't palatable about those families. I don't know how such a judgment could even be reached for a defamation case, because it was really a defaming, slanderous, but how you could reach such a judgment is beyond me. It's really not, wasn't just, and it wasn't just served. But in any case, instead of seeking damages, they have went after Infowars and got a court to decide that Infowars should be taken over by the parody newspaper, The Onion, and then I guess they're going to take it over and try to be funny about conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theories aren't funny because they usually turn out to be true. Hence the Alex Jones was right jar, that whole meme. And there's many things to list, and we're going to go down some of those things coming up in the next hour or so. But without any other delays, let's get in the headlines today for April 4th. All right, we're going to start out with PJ Media. Trump's Strait of Hormuz move blends power and mercy. President Donald Trump announced Sunday that the United States will begin helping ships from the neutral and innocent countries leave the Strait of Hormuz starting Monday morning. He called the effort Project Freedom and framed it as a humanitarian move for ships trapped by the Iran war. And then it shows his Truth Social post there. The article goes on to say oil prices fell after Trump's announcement. Brent crude dropped $1.83 to $106.34 per barrel. It's not much, but better than a stick in the eye. While the U.S. West Texas Intermediate fell 172 to 122. Markets don't reward speeches, but the words sound cool. They move when a president signals that chaos won't be allowed to spread. So Project Freedom is going to try to begin escorting ships. That means the U.S. Navy will attempt to escort ships out of the Gulf. Nobody should pretend Project Freedom will be simple. Public details remain limited, and follow-up from the White House and Pentagon hadn't filled in every operational blank by Sunday afternoon. Trump's posture is clear. He's telling Iran, ship owners, seafarers, and energy markets that the United States sees what's going on and intends to move in a region where hesitation often gets read as weakness, or, as in the case of the U.S. mainstream media, thinking Trump is overmatched. The announcement gives American allies and neutral partners something firmer than diplomatic shrugging. Now, the European Union had also gone along and tried to form up a plan to assist the United States in what's happening. So, as far as the Strait of Hormuz is concerned, whether or not they're going to try to help the United States open up the strait or not. So, what we're dealing with here is a kind of a game of chess. Is it a bluff? It's not really a bluff, because the blockade is going to stay in place because the blockade is working. Is further military effort, operations by the United States going to commence? I would say yes, and this is why. But first, let's go to the Just the News article. Story number 2, Iran threatens to attack U.S. forces escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz. All right, well, this is not the bluff, but this is sort of poking Iran to see what they're going to do and trying to force them out of their holes, so to speak. So we're in the middle of a ceasefire, correct? So escorting ships out of the Strait of Hormuz is not a violation of the ceasefire. So Iran says, well, we're going to attack ships. If the U.S. military moves ships into the Strait of Hormuz or into the Persian Gulf, we're going to escort ships. So, okay, they're going to escort ships. My deal is, if they're going to fire on the U.S. Navy, that's going to violate the ceasefire. In a diplomatic sense, the United States is going to seem to be on top. And even if we respond by renewing airstrikes on Iran, that will be as a result of the provocations of Iran. Sorry, I'm trying to get everything was disconnected and trying to get it all together after this hiatus of mine was a little bit of a difficulty. Take this opportunity now, though, to ask you to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the podcast. Don't forget, I'm here every day, usually every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Also on Tuesday, there's a bonus episode of Tuesdays with Perry. We usually go live at 9:15. You can also follow me on social media. I'm also live on Facebook and X and BitChute and YouTube, but you can find me also on True Social, Getter, Minds, Substack. Moving back to this story from Just the News, Iran's military warned Monday that U.S. forces will be attacked if they begin escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz. The warnings by a top commander of the Iranian military, reported in the state-run media, follow President Trump's post on Truth Social on Sunday, saying that the U.S. would begin guiding ships from other nations out of the strait, on which Iran has an eastern shore and is a major shipping channel. And as we said, it's very difficult militarily because of Iran's eastern shore of the Persian Gulf, where the cliffs are full of redoubts for missile emplacements, et cetera. And as we said many, many times, or I've said many, many times on this broadcast, is that the real issue here is anti-ship missiles. It's more important than fissile material concerning this conflict. And the big overarching issue, obviously, with which this pertains because people don't seem to understand global politics, it's China. So China was the one that was sending advanced anti-ship missiles, hypersonic missiles to Iran. And this is all about China. This is not, obviously, it's about Iran not having a nuclear weapon to threaten their neighbors and others with their ballistic missiles and so forth and so on. But it's more about China than people care to offer. Now, I think Trump, I think anybody, Trump, others, would have a hard time managing this because you have an opportunity here. We had an opportunity when we began the airstrikes on Iran. Iran and China didn't move. And that was the opportunity. Now, seems like during this stalemate that things are starting to move. First, from the Telegraph, Iran offers Trump 1 month deal to end war as world faces tipping point. Plan requires both sides to lift Strait of Hormuz blockades, but leaves issues of Tehran's nuclear program unresolved. So this is Iran's offer, and Iran's offer isn't an offer. The attack was to forestall and have Iran surrender its fissile material and its nuclear program. Really a military nuclear program for nuclear missiles. So Trump offers this 1 month. All they're doing is kicking the can down the road. This is what they want to do, is to forestall a further aggression from the United States and Israel, to maintain their nuclear program, because during negotiations, they said they're not giving it up. And they read and watch Western media, so they know what the conundrum is here. We're not going to send in troops to get the fissile material. And I think a sustained bombing campaign is in the works. Now, if the Democrats in the United States, after the 60-day threshold, feel that they are going to hamstring the president in this regard, so be it. Let them do that. Breaking news, though, from the New York Post: Iran fires on U.S. warship in the Strait of Hormuz after Trump announces plans to guide ships out. Iran said Monday it had fired upon an American naval vessel on the first day of a bid by Washington to force open the Strait of Hormuz to global shipping. The semi-official Fars news agency, which has been close ties with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, initially claimed an unidentified U.S. ship was hit by 2 missiles near the port of Jansk, southeast of the strait, after ignoring orders to halt. U.S. Central Command denied the claim on social media, saying on X, no U.S. Navy ships have been struck. U.S. forces are supporting Project Freedom and enforcing the naval blockade on Iranian ports. So then they went on to say, is it here? Thought I had that in text. Oh, here it is. It's in the same article here. A senior Iranian official then told Reuters Tehran had fired a warning shot and that it was unclear whether the warship had been damaged. That was just the last line of that. If they hit any vessel with a missile, that will be a violation of the ceasefire, and I imagine open hostilities will begin. Diplomatically speaking, who knows if that's going to be the case, or they'll have some other diplomatic card to play. But as far as I'm concerned, all the Iranians are just buying time to rearm or reestablish their nuclear missile program, or try to have more advanced missiles, brought in from China or other countries, Russia. The interdiction of those things has been successful in the north by the Israelis when the Russians were trying to get armament to Iran. Israel went in and put a stop to that. And then in the sea lanes there in the Strait of Hormuz, the blockade is keeping the Chinese ships out. And the Americans said, to China that we're not going to let you ship cargo into Iran. Whether that's been successful or not, I haven't seen intelligence to suggest otherwise, but you never know. Real Clear Politics, Besant, we're suffocating Iran economically. They've only collected a pittance of Hormuz tolls. Like, who wants to pay that? And he went on to say, with Sunday Morning, with Maria Bartiromo, Besant said, I can tell you that we're suffocating the regime and they are not able to pay their soldiers. This is a real economic blockade, and in all of its parts of the government, all hands on deck. It is the blockade that our great Navy is doing. No ships are getting through, and we have upped the pressure on anyone trying to remit money into Iran to help our IRGC. Which is going to bring us to our next article, which is World War III fears are heightened with this kind of news from Zero Hedge. In a watershed moment, China orders companies to defy U.S. sanctions. China ordered companies in the country not to comply with U.S. sanctions on 5 domestic refiners linked to the Iranian oil trade, deploying for the first time a blocking measure introduced in 2021 that was aimed at protecting its firms from foreign laws it deemed unjustified. Refiners, including Hengli Petrochemical Refinery, which was sanctioned last month, and several other privately owned processors, have been facing asset freezes and transaction bans. Hengli was the most ambitious target to date in the China's refining sector, underscores U.S. eagerness to push Iran to the negotiating table at all costs, even just weeks before an unexpected and long-awaited meeting between Trump and his counterpart, Xi Jinping. But if Trump was hoping Beijing would just let this creeping financial blockade slide, he was wrong. On Saturday, the country's commercial ministry said in a statement that the U.S. measures unlawfully restrict normal trade with third countries and breach international norms. And in a rare move, it issued an order banning recognition, enforcement, and compliance with the sanctions aimed at the 5 companies. So China is beginning to disregard the United States sanctions on Iran, which, as Scott Bessent said, were proving effective. But now the Chinese somehow are going to try to get around the blockade. But what this is really addressing is not the oil per se, it is the proceeds from Iranian oil. And this is how it goes. The Chinese government had consistently opposed unilateral sanctions that lack authorization from the United Nations and the basis of international law. Still, banks working with Hengli and other private processors are scrambling to understand the decision and are seeking clarity from banking regulators. Public holidays in China this week allow them some time since business is on hold, as does the grace period provided by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Controls, which is where the sanctions get their teeth from. Story goes on to say the sanctions and Beijing's response come just weeks before a highly anticipated meeting between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. While the blocking measure is not likely to derail the summit, Washington's reaction to it will indicate if the matter escalates, according to the analysts from Eurasia Group. Right, so we have to avoid the escalation ladder. The big fear here is World War III, in other words, drawing communist China into the conflict in Iran. But what this is also saying is that the blockade and the sanctions are not only hurting Iran, which they most certainly are, and as well as the military strikes, but also hurting China, communist China, their Belt and Road Initiative, and so forth and so on. Fleshing out the article, the story goes on to say the refineries primarily work with Chinese banks that have not yet been directly sanctioned. The analyst, led by Dominic Chu, wrote in a note, if the U.S. extends secondary sanctions to those institutions or major state-owned entities, Beijing would likely respond with more forceful countermeasures. And we don't really know what those are. The injunction allows the refineries to seek compensation in Chinese courts from entities that comply with U.S. sanctions. So they would be suing people that are upholding the sanctions. By activating its blocking measures for the first time since adopting the rule in 2021, China has demonstrated a lower threshold for deploying its legal and regulatory toolkit to counter U.S. sanctions. Regardless, they're countering U.S. sanctions, and the sanctions are supposedly justified by Iran's own illegal behavior and Iran's illegal behavior, but they're closing the Strait of Hormuz, which is the big one. But other illegal, funding terrorist groups, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's all out for debate. Lastly, for the past decade, China has been a single largest buyer of Tehran's sanctioned oil shipments, many of them arriving indirectly and through private refiners and then turned into gasoline, diesel, and other oil products. Chinese customs data do not reflect that trade, with the last official shipment recorded several years ago, and yet the only source of Iran state revenue are Chinese sanctions-busting teapot refiners. In other words, this is the whole dark fleet, it's been illegal in terms of U.S. sanctions, that they're trying to undermine the sanctions, obviously, and benefit from this illegal oil sanctions and what they call as sanctions busting teapot refiners, which are the smaller refiners that are trying to get around the sanctions. However, now with this move by China, they're going to start refining this illegal oil, this dark fleet oil, in major refineries in China. So the Chinese are becoming just a little bit more emboldened because they're under pressure too. It's not, as I said, not just Iran. China's decision to activate blocking measures on Saturday risks becoming what Bloomberg calls a watershed moment. While China has often railed against unilateral sanction, it has in the past quietly allowed companies to comply with them to avoid blowback in its own economy and preserve access to U.S. financial system and markets. Like China said, I don't know why we don't use the U.S. market as leverage against other countries, which we try to do through tariffs and so forth and so on. And like I said, I thought it was unbelievable, but that the U.S. Supreme Court sided with the tariff busters and saying some tariffs were illegal, and now that the United States has to pay back those tariff monies, mostly to China, which he could have used as a tariff rebate right before the elections, which he was planning. That was the whole point against that, is to take that away from the Republicans and Donald Trump right before the midterms. So it was really a political move by the Supreme Court, which is audacious and quite damning. Lastly, I said lastly before, but I mean it this time. Beijing is now signaling a far firmer stance against such restrictions by directing companies not to abide by U.S. sanctions on 5 domestic refiners linked to Iranian oil trade. Commentary on the People's Daily app, the Communist Party mouthpiece, called the announcement a pivotal step in the transition of China's foreign-related legal weapon from institutional reserves to practical applications. Whatever. The thing is what Trump is trying to do is reassert American dominance globally and in the world, specifically because that the globalists, the European and American elite with Chinese communists and other socialists around the globe, trying to build this new world order, world government, and as a socialist state modeled after communist China. That's all this is what that is about. Is it in the short term more explainable to geopolitical neophytes that it's about Iranian nuclear weapons? Well, yes, in the near term, in the short term, in the long term, it's breaking apart this What they wanted was a global hegemony of corporations with the socialist super state governing how the world works. This is just one step in it. I mean, there are a lot of people that agree with me, don't agree with me, can't see that far down the road. And like people like Alex Jones is, I don't want to hear, um, now that we're in it, we have to back the president or the U.S., which I think we should do. I think he's being calculating enough to let this policy decision that I didn't agree with slide. Moving on, story number 7, post-millennial, Trump says U.S. will take control of Cuba almost immediately. Cuba's got problems. We'll finish one first. I like to finish a job. He went on to say, will the United States take over Cuba? I don't think so, but I think it should be brought into the protectorate. Not made a territory, obviously, but when the U.S. and U.S. business had investment in Cuba, it certainly wasn't more depressed. So this is the thing with capitalism. In capitalism, there are winners and losers, but the majority of people have the opportunity to become wealthy to a certain degree. Not rich, but wealthy in terms of, maybe you could accumulate hundreds of thousands of dollars over your life. But socialism brings everybody's even, but everybody's equally poor. So you never can break out and become, socialism doesn't believe in private property, so why should you have wealth? I mean, I think everybody would like to be wealthy to a certain degree. So bringing back capital investment into Cuba will give people the opportunity to become wealthy. But the problem is not everybody is concerned with wealth. And some people don't even concern themselves with making a living, and then they're going to fall behind the poverty line. And you see that in this country too. If you don't keep your wits about you and realize, I got 30 to 50 years of money-making potential in my lifetime. How am I going to exercise that? And hopefully at the end, you've built enough of a nest egg to fund you through retirement and hopefully give some to your children. That was the American dream. But you can't have the American dream under socialism. President Trump said Friday that the U.S. would be taking over Cuba almost immediately, drawing laughter from a crowd and sparking speculation over whether he was joking or signaling a more serious act. A future military action, I don't think that that's the case. And he comes from originally a place called Cuba, which will be taking over almost immediately. Cuba's got problems. We'll finish one first. I like to finish a job. On the way back from Iran, we'll have one of our big, maybe USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carriers, the biggest in the world. He continued, we'll have some come in, stop about 100 yards offshore, and they'll say, thank you very much, we give up. I mean, you're never sure exactly how, serious Trump is about things, but that's not the point. The point is he likes to talk a lot, and when he talks a lot, the enemy tries to draw inference from what he's saying. And so he keeps them guessing, keeps them on their toes. I wonder how that's going to work with Cuba, but I think most of the comments are directed toward China. Why do you say that? Well, I say that because of the story number 8 here, Zero Hedge. Chinese hackers spied on Cuban embassy as Trump ramped up blockade threats. According to the findings from the cyber firm Gambit Security, cited in a Bloomberg report, the campaign began in January and compromised the emails of 68 officials, including the Cuban ambassador and the deputy chief of mission. Additionally, the breach coincided with several of intense geopolitical friction occurring shortly after the U.S. raid in Venezuela and roughly coincided with decision by U.S. President Donald Trump's administration to halt oil deliveries to Cuba, contributing to widespread blackouts across the country. The report concluded that the intruders bypassed embassy security by exploiting 2 5-year-old vulnerabilities in outdated Microsoft Exchange email servers. According to the Gambit findings, once inside, the attackers downloaded entire inboxes belonging to political and intelligence officials. Chinese aggressive push into Cuba has been sounding alarm bells since President Trump administration took power, with fears of covert surveillance operations targeting the United States, which also the establishment DC think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies has been highlighting, and this fresh Bloomberg report seems to confirm this. So, as I said many times on this broadcast, that the Chinese have been at war with the United States since the 50s. Have we cooled relations? Have they sought better relations? They obviously sought entering the WTO, which was a mistake, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Chinese have been at war with us, right? Not open conflict, not kinetic warfare. They're not shooting missiles or guns or rockets at U.S. military installations. They use proxies like that to do so, including Iran, and they're obviously aiding the Russians in Ukraine because that is a war against NATO, against the United States. Lesser now that Trump took office. But the Chinese, as far as espionage goes, and other sabotage goes, cyber warfare as well, they've been at war with us. So to think that for some reason the United States is not at war with China is just a facade. Does it, it's fifth generational warfare. Does it have to be shooting guns? No, of course not. We don't want it to come to that, obviously. But to think that they're not adversarial in everything they do, is a mistake, and including to usurp the hegemonic power of the United States globally with the help, this is a funny thing, with the help of the Davos elite and socialists worldwide, including the socialists on the street in New York during May Day. Now, I'm not going to really cover that too much because it is what it is. You think socialism is going to work? It just doesn't work economically. You don't generate enough growth, enough productivity under socialist communist systems to feed a 21st century modern state. You could keep borrowing, and even under capitalism, we've went way overboard with borrowing, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But let's get to the main story today. Daily news. Story number 9, Alex Jones bids for farewell to Infowars, launches new show and network. A defiant Alex Jones signed off on what may have been his final Infowars broadcast on Thursday, then launched a new program on Friday. The 52-year-old conspiracy theorist and his webcast crew raised their cups for a toast Thursday night as Jones seemed to concede his Austin, Texas studio was shutting down. But Infowars assured fans that they hadn't heard the last of him. They're turning the power off at midnight, Jones said towards the close of his show. They claim private detectives were waiting to lock the doors while taking solace in the fact that the Texas court had earlier delayed a proposal to transfer his company's assets to the Onion. So, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast here, is that the Sandy Hook families were awarded, and one FBI agent had been awarded a total of $1.4 or $5 billion because Alex Jones said something on his radio program. What did he say? He said, the shit stinks. And I agree, and many people agreed with him. Maybe the way he said it wasn't correct. I don't know. I don't know how you get defamation to the tune of $1.4 billion from someone says these people are crisis actors. And actually, some of the parents had acting experience, and even some of the other what seemed to be crisis actors have acting experience, including what was the old guy's name that apparently had children get off a school bus and come into his house. And that's never been investigated either. I don't want to get into the whole Sandy Hook thing, but in any case, $1.4 billion in a defamation suit where he didn't openly defame anybody. Because in a defamation suit, you have to say that the defaming costed you. But they didn't even do that. They're like, oh, well, yeah, we couldn't make some money. But it's really the emotional distress that's worth $1.4 billion. Well, I don't know, like $10 million would assuage certainly some emotional distress. Bloomberg News, Alex Jones announces shutdown of Infowars conspiracy platform. Well, that's Bloomberg, right? Conspiracy platform. It's not a conspiracy platform. It's what it was using your free speech rights, calling attention to things that stink. So whether it's Sandy Hook or anything else, is like you have to be able to use your free speech to point at people and say, hey, those guys are robber barons, or hey, the federal government is hiding information from you. Hey, these elections don't seem, they seem fraudulent, or this seems fraudulent, or that seems fraudulent. Being able to point at things and say it doesn't look right. That's not conspiracy. That's just smelling what's in the air, and when it stinks, you just say so. But Bloomberg is an enemy of Infowars, and they called it a conspiracy platform, as everybody else, and even Stephen Colbert, would joke constantly or make fun of Alex Jones calling out what needs to be called out. He was the only person. The reason that I even started paying attention to Alex Jones, I was a bit of a leftist at a certain point. I didn't agree with him politically, but he was the only one with a regular news program that would point out what was apparent, right? And for me, somebody who studied the news for years and years and years, it was already apparent. But for someone to actually, especially after 9/11, pointing out the anomalies there, but the same thing with the people that would side with the conspiracy surrounding the JFK assassination, or the USS Liberty, or the Gulf of Tonkin, or Pearl Harbor. I mean, you could go on and on. Everybody else in the media keeps flapping the same old tired false narrative, surrounding the Pearl Harbor attack. FDR knew, and the generals knew, the attack was going to happen, but it was a way to get us into the war. And so they moved the carrier groups out and left some decommissioned battleships at Pearl Harbor and allowed the Japanese to attack. Well, 2,000 people were killed. They allowed it to happen. Nobody talks about that. Gulf of Tonkin was fake, et cetera, et cetera. And you could go into 9/11 and the Las Vegas shooting and Sandy Hook, and it keeps going on and on and on. And nobody wants to talk about what's really causing, let's say, mass shooters. Nope. And what we're finding out now is that AI, right, was trained to do what sock puppets were doing previously, which was to coax people with obviously mental instabilities that are on pharmaceutical drugs that make them more violent, and to coax them into violence. Now you have AI doing that because you don't need the sock puppets anymore. But nobody wants to talk about that. That's a conspiracy theory, even though we know the black box warnings on the pharmaceuticals for antidepressants, depressants, and other psychoactive medications, pharmaceuticals that cause you to be violent, to be so deluded that you will drive all the way to cross country to commit an act of violence that you know is wrong, morally rapacious. Daily Caller, Alex Jones, Infowars officially shuts down after 27 years. Alex Jones' longtime program, Infowars, officially shut down its operations Thursday while satirical website is trying to purchase the company. Infowars shut down due to the bankruptcy proceedings related to $1.4 billion defamation judgments owed to the families of the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting victims, if you believe they're victims. And I imagine they are. I believe there was a shooting there, but the surrounding the shooting, whether or not, the key question is whether or not Adam Lanza was the shooter, which I don't believe he was. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding him, his family, where they lived, and the status of the school, which was shut down and reopened with a limited amount of students. Any case. The closure came just after a court receiver halted payments for rent and services, which prompted Jones to move from his studio in Austin, Texas, and operate his independent company, Alex Jones Network. All glory goes to Jesus Christ, our Heavenly Father. We are committing ourselves to God in this holy fight, and we are committing that if God stands with us, who can stand against us? And that's how I close out that broadcast. Right. So 27 years is a long run for a show, which is going to continue. This was listed as an opinion piece, but that what they did is news there. We'll see. The family of the Sandy Hook victims and one federal Bureau of Investigation agent sued Jones and Infowars parent company Free Speech Services for defamation and emotional distress after Jones repeatedly claimed the shooting was a hoax aimed at confiscating American firearms. A jury ordered Jones to pay at least $965 million in damages to the defendants in 2022, which prompted Jones and Free Speech Systems to file for bankruptcy and protection. And this is in my state, by the way. And let me tell you one thing, is that the state is on the verge of banning Glock pistols. So if you don't think this state went on a rampage after 9/11 of infringing on people's Second Amendment rights, they have. I'm testament to that. There's no reason that people can't have a Glock pistol and they go, whoa, these young thugs out there turning the Glock pistols into automatic pistols is too easy. Well, if you take a semi-automatic pistol and you make it, or a semi-automatic rifle and you make it an automatic rifle, isn't that a crime already? So why don't you punish people for the crime and stop making it, stop taking away every opportunity for someone to do something illegal with something and not allow people with legitimately to do those certain things or own certain things for legitimate purpose. I mean, it's not legal to you to take your car and run down people on the street, but you're allowed to have a car. So what makes the car dangerous is the person driving it, running down people. I mean, people have heard that now. Time and time again. Story number 12, Daily Mail. Infowars dramatically falls off air as Alex Jones accused of derailing purchase by The Onion amid new show, amid launch of new show. He was exercising all his legal rights to derail the purchase by The Onion, but The Onion didn't offer the most money. So you see, the conspiracy here is that you're supposed to auction off the liquidate the company so you get the most amount of money that goes to other folks. I think I did it. Fucking, excuse me. Weeks after The Onion had reached a deal to buy Infowars, Tim Heidecker, who is the site's new creative director, said that Jones had temporarily thwarted the deal. That motherfucker, Alex Jones, has somehow worked his way into the Texas Third Court of Appeals and got some sort of stay postponing the transfer of the site until another judgment can come in. Like I said, it was about the auction. Auction goes to the highest bidder. Auction doesn't go to the least bidder, because that's who, the judge is supposed to be impartial in this to get the awardees some of their money, but they're not concerned about money. Most of these parents were rich. Let's see if it can't come. See, that's the problem with with Rumble. So I'm streaming out of Rumble. That's the problem, is that it doesn't have a spell check. And so unless you import it into another program, you can't see if there was a typo. And usually when I'm putting the show together, I'm bleary-eyed because I'm not really a morning person. And so I was never a good proofreader, as my old editors would testify to. I was never a good proofreader, even though I try. That's why you need to proofread multiple times, because you could easily glaze over something. Infowars had struggled to stay afloat since Jones was ordered to pay the families of the Sandy Hook shooting victims $1.4 billion in 2022, when he falsely claimed that the tragedy where 20 children and 6 teachers were murdered was a hoax. Yeah, he called hoax because, as many of us noticed, is that there wasn't certain information coming out, and it was apparent that something was constructed. How much of this event was constructed, who knows? Some of it certainly was. And I always like to say that Sandy Hook Elementary School was the longest closed crime scene in American history. Nobody talks about that. Why? I don't want reporters crawling around the school. What? And looking for evidence? Yeah, you don't want people finding evidence that the authorities either refuse to look at or disregarded. All right, more stories here. Story number 13, post-millennial Cole Allen's bullet definitely hit Secret Service agent at White House Correspondents' Dinner, says U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro. It was definitely his bullet he hit at the Secret Service agent. He had every intention to kill him and anyone who got in his way on his way to killing the President of the United States. Okay, this is Jeanine Pirro. First of all, he had a shotgun. Now, did he draw his pistol and shoot that? She said bullet, but apparently, and to the suspect's own admission, he had buckshot in there. And when I heard the audio, it sounded like a shotgun blast and then 5 shots. Now, should have had it here over the weekend. I had seen the video showing that one Secret Service agent tried to fire at Allen when he was running by, missed him, and hit another Secret Service agent. You saw the muzzle flash from the barrel. Did that also happen? I mean, obviously law enforcement is going to concoct a narrative that suits them and the Justice Department, but everybody wants to know what really happened. So who got shot, And in the video, it shows a Secret Service agent firing, but it was unclear whether it hit the other Secret Service agent. So the point is, in an investigation, a lot of this won't come out till trial, but still, ballistically, I would like to know how many shots were fired, by whom, where those shots went. Thank you very much. NBC News, fakes, slop, distortions, and spin, how the media environment made this Trump assassination attempt unbelievable. In the midterm election year, fears of an unreliable information environment have become more acute with each falsehood embraced by mainstream audiences. Wow, this is from NBC. Each falsehood embraced by mainstream audiences. So again, NBC News is like leaving it up for you to decide. Of course, I want to know what the truth is, whether I like it or not, because it's only a truth about one thing is only a puzzle piece in the greater truth. So if you use your bias to claim something is true when it's actually false, you're going to distort your whole worldview. National Review, the online left just can't process the White House correspondent's dinner assassination attempt. It's true. Was it an assassination attempt? Of course. It was an op, a false flag, all fake, just like the others. Someone on Reddit posted a picture of the shooter from his Instagram account and said it was AI. The pants were wrong. The stool in the background looked odd. What if the guy was completely invented and were being played? You have to ask why. Well, the answers are obvious. Right. With any kind of narrative, with anything you see, is it real? It's okay to ask that. But you have to have firm evidence that something is not real or concocted or, as I like to say, constructed. So people are constructed, events are constructed, but the purpose is to fool the media and investigators. So a sophisticated operation constructed, you have to fool at least the initial investigators. It depends who's compromised. And that's all you have to do. But as long as you start the spin early enough, it's hard to correct it. So, and people listen to the beginning of a story or the beginning of a narrative, and then they'll let it go. And so you just have to maintain that for a little bit. And then if the conspiracy theorists come out of the woodwork and say, hey, look at this, by the time they do that, most people have moved on to something else. Just the news, lawmen believe trip from Carolinas to Washington a threat to Trump. Daniel Swain was taken from Tidal Wave Auto Spa, North Carolina community of Apex on Wednesday. He is accused of making violent political threats that drew the U.S. Secret Service, the State Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and a bomb squad to Lake Pine Drive location. Oops. U.S. led mayor. That was from a different story. I thought I had more text from that. So this guy, Daniel Swain, who lived in North Carolina, had written all over his car that he was going to kill Trump and then was planning a trip to Washington, D.C. And although he had been spoken to several times by the Secret Service for issuing online threats, he continued his tirade and this time was planning to go to Washington, and he had with him weapons. And so they arrested him. Which moves us to our next story from the Federalist, story number 17, leftist indoctrination factories churn out would-be Trump assassins every day. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but Carolyn Levitt said left-wing cult of hatred has legitimized political violence against the president and anyone who supports him. For who consistently or constantly falsely label and slander the president as a fascist, a threat to democracy, and compare him to Hitler. They're fueling this kind of violence, indeed. And there's more. Post-millennial Palisades firestorm suspect was obsessed with Luigi Mangione. And wasn't just this other assassin was also interested in Luigi Mangione. Federal prosecutors allege that the 30-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht appeared fixated with Mangione and the man accused of murdering United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. So there's this glorification of political violence. Oh, you're downtrodden. You're being, you're being undermined. I know you're upset. And the reason is because of that guy. Whoever it is, CEO. Got something on it. Yep, that is Blue Cities. All right, we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. Next story here. New York Post. Story number 19, ex-Minnesota state trooper reveals how state tried to cover up fraud allegations, then Walz shut down his department. Former Minnesota state trooper Jay Swanson, a former criminal investigator for DHS, also revealed that it is well known among Somali refugees in East Africa that Minnesota was the best place to go in the U.S. to pull off child care fraud schemes. Post-millennial Oklahoma man convicted for threats of gunning down ICE agents. Only a good ICE terrorist is buried 6 feet under. Logan Christopher Murfin, 26, was convicted of 5 counts of threatening to assault and murder federal law enforcement officers, as well as 5 counts of interstate communication with a threat to injure. Big surprise. And as the Federalist said, we're churning out assassins every day coming out of academia, etc. Post-millennial, again, ICE arrests illegal alien trucker Rajinder Kumar in Oregon for crash that killed newlywed couple married just 16 days. It's hard to even decide whether this is the story I already covered or a new story. How many newlywed couples were killed by illegal immigrant semi-tractor trailer truck drivers? They're just on and on. They're killing people left and right. Oh, it doesn't matter. Post-millennial, again, illegal alien fugitive captured after 14 years on Washington's most wanted list for fleeing crash that killed teen. So another guy, Cortez Vargas, was placed on most wanted list in 2012 after was Washington State Police, the Washington State. After failing to appear in court on charges, he was tied to a fatal hit-and-run accident, which obviously he was. That's why he didn't show up. And then he lived in the country for 14 more years. New York Post, anti-ICE protesters mob New York City hospital as 9 activists are arrested in chaotic clash with law enforcement. A mob of 200 anti-ICE protesters blocked emergency entrances and exits to Brooklyn Hospital Saturday night. The unruly protesters quickly flooded the streets in and around the hospital. When ICE agents went to arrest an illegal Nigerian migrant, Chidozie Wilson Okeke, who was previously arrested. Officers on the scene requested that protesters disperse and step back onto the sidewalk, like they usually do. What happens? But no, they rioted and threw trash into the street, tried to block traffic. For what reason? What they're doing is not illegal. And this is my problem with anti-law enforcement, is it doesn't matter if the cops are doing something illegal. I don't like cops doing something illegal, either brutalizing or killing people. I don't really, although it's legal in a lot of instances for them to do that. You know, I'm not for police brutality or also arrest, which is hard to prove. You could be detained and not formally be charged and arrested and what have you. But that's my problem, is that your tax, if you pay taxes, your tax dollars go to law enforcement. There are legal ways to address illegal activity, but from law enforcement, but they don't do that. They just like turn up in the street and cause a ruckus. And then we have to deploy more police to deal with the riot or the protest, which saps more tax dollars. Just the news, in 4 months, border agents arrest 1,000 child sex offenders in Tampa area. Border Patrol agents working in Tampa, Florida have arrested their 1,000th child sex offender in just 4 months. The 1,000th arrest was of a Trinidadian man convicted of 5 felony offenses in Hillsborough County with a lengthy criminal record. They're working out of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Miami sector's Tampa station, one of the oldest Border Patrol stations in the country. Why don't you go protest that? You like child sex offenders? I mean, it's just, like I said, I don't like everything police do, but there are ways to deal with it. It's unfortunately, it's a necessity for state-sanctioned people with guns to go around and stop people committing crime. That's what democracy is. You know, a law with no enforcement is no law, as we found out with immigration. New York Post: illegal migrant butchers 2 women in Savage Long Island murders, then calls cops to say he killed somebody. Roni Yahir Alvarenga Rivera, 22, of El Salvador, who entered the U.S. as an unaccompanied 12-year-old in 2016, knifed a 42-year-old co-worker and mom to death at an Island Park Wednesday around 12:30 a.m. I think he knifed the co-worker in his apartment. Yeah, Thursday, 3 hours earlier, Rivera had hacked his 32-year-old roommate to death at their Valley Stream apartment. Tragic woman was identified by cops as Eddie Raquel Hernandez Castillo. Then he went to his job at Wendy's and killed the other woman. Not supposed to be here. And this is the problem. The families of these people, you know, he's not supposed to be here. The murder wouldn't, if he was still in Honduras or El Salvador, wherever he was from, he wouldn't be here, which means he wouldn't have killed those people. And democracy is limited in other countries, so a lot of people who don't come here, are certainly not naturalized in any way, shape, or form, don't understand that laws are made to prevent this sort of thing. And if you live in a democracy, you should obey the laws without need for enforcement because you believe in a democracy that was arrived at by consent of the governed. USA Today: amid national scrutiny, LA takes step toward non-citizen voting. Let me try that one more time. From USA Today, story number 26: amid national scrutiny, LA takes step toward non-citizen voting. Still a little tired. Yeah, what's new? I mean, they're illegal immigrants, non-citizens voting all over the friggin' place. And the thing is, the law only specifies federal elections. So if a state or maybe a municipality wants non-citizens to vote in their elections, they can vote that, they allow that to happen. And of course they do. Moving back to the SPLC, that's a Southern Poverty Law Center. The Federalist has the story: SPLC indictment shows partisan activists were running the FBI domestic terror program. No shit. The federal government built a system that let unvetted experts feed partisan analysis directly into domestic terror work products. In other words, if you don't know what this means, the FBI used highly partisan activist group, that's the SPLC, as an unelected, unvetted intelligence wing of the federal bureaucracy. For years, the Bureau just didn't consult with the SPLC. It folded the group's ideology into threat assessments, and that's where you get Biden saying that the biggest threat to the United States is white supremacy. And the National Review: how the SPLC biased hate map has quietly influenced billions of dollars in corporate giving. Why is that important? Because of this next article from the Fox News channel. John Ossoff silent on SPLC indictment after taking more than $700,000 from affiliate or indicted group. The DOJ charged the Southern Poverty Law Center with bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. But if you don't know, Senator John Ossoff, of a Democrat of Georgia, has ties to the organization. The most vulnerable Senate Democrat running for re-election in 2026 is endorsed by the Law Center's 501c4 arm. The group contributed more than $700,000 to his campaign in 2020, and who knows how much they're going to help him this time around. The problem is that John Ossoff took money, and this is the circle jerk. Like if we went back to the National Review, how the SPLC's biased hate map has quietly influenced billions of dollars in corporate giving to them, which then manifests itself in donating to Democrats to get them elected. So it's using a false premise to raise money and then taking that money and funding campaigns of politicians who buy into this false narrative. National Review, the Islamic Revolution's Red-Green Alliance comes to America. We've been talking about this for a while. The future supreme leader of Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, found utility in integrating the influence of leftist ideologies that had made such a mark on the Middle East over previous decades into his revolutionary pitch. Then they talk about Jason Burke in his new book, The Revolutionists, describes the genesis of what would become Iranian's Red-Green Alliance and his epic retelling of how Marxist militants of the 1970s evolved from Cuban-style communists into socialist pan-Arabists and eventually Islamists. It's all the same, right? Trying to get the great Satan America that provides freedom and opportunity to people of all stripes. Dying former Congressman Barney Frank of the Dodd-Frank Act, actually, tells Democrats their far-left messaging is costing them voters. Frank, 86, is releasing a book from hospice criticizing Democrats for neglecting economic equality, and that was the basis of the Democratic Party for years. But when they started losing that because they don't have a good track record, they can keep people on assistance, but they can't help them out of poverty like a capitalist opportunities can. They moved to this culture when they were losing against Donald Trump. They moved into a culture war because they thought that Donald Trump was winning on that ground, culture war ground, when actually that was just part of his attack. Also part of his attack was economic opportunity for people. So Frank is going to put out this book, and he's doing interviews, and he's saying that the left now is not the left of Barney Frank or my ex-Senator Chris Dodd, is now a color revolutionists' dream of Red-Green Alliance and constantly whining about, cultural misdeeds to try to paint everybody who's a Republican or white or whatever as these evil conspirators, white supremacy to keep the colored people down, which is zero hedge. Democrats meltdown after Supreme Court redistricts race-based gerrymandering. Messed that one up too. You might have heard about this. This is just a retelling. There was a Louisiana Supreme Court enforcing the Supreme Court of the United States decision to, as far as gerrymandering, can't be discriminatory, which means it can't be race-based, which means what the Democrats have been doing for years as part of the Voting Rights Act is trying to incorporate poor black populations into Republican districts to make them Democrat. Here it is. It makes sense that Democrats are clinging to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits voting practices, including redistricting maps that result in a denial or abridgment of the right to vote on account of race, which it doesn't do. The assumption being that the minorities, specifically black Americans, require rigged districts where they are the majority in order to maintain power in government. In other words, anybody could get to the poll. You get to the poll, you might have to wait in line, but you get to vote. Right? I think the lack of polling places or polling stations within the polling place is more of an abridgment of the Voting Rights Act than this is. This just says you can't base it on race. And what they're doing is they were including blacks in traditionally conservative districts to try to water down the Republican vote, which was very successful for time. Zero hedge blue cities across the U.S. are spiraling into a financial collapse. This is where this comes in. It might be one of the biggest economic stories in modern history. The Democrats try to keep it as quiet as possible. There's bloodletting going on in blue cities, financial disasters in the making. Just like politicians and governments had, shelled out money for goodies, but blue cities are in financial crisis. That's why they rely on aid from the federal government, because they can't balance their books. Just the news, Washington governor admits to state ethics violation and signed agreement. Governor Bob Ferguson conceded this week into violating state ethics laws, agreeing to accept a $4,000 fine for letting his former chief strategy officer take a taxpayer-funded flight with him last year on a private plane. Fortune magazine, interest on U.S. debt is becoming a top driver of future deficits as sheer size of past borrowing overwhelms the fiscal outlook. So if you didn't know, the debt service per year is $1 trillion, which I don't think that's going to top growth, but it's bad enough to be a problem. The GDP over the past 12-month period was an estimated $31.22 trillion, and that's exactly where the public debt stood. So it's 102%, pushing the debt to GDP ratio. Bad news. Moving on, just the news. Trump looks to return ATF to original mission, gun regulation that truly improves public safety. That's good. He's going to revise more than 30 federal gun regulations. That needs to be done. I wish he would do something about Connecticut. In any case, if you knew the ATF, it's an alcohol, tobacco, and firearm. It used to concentrate on alcohol and tobacco and used to be part of the Treasury Department, and now it's part of the Judicial Department, Department of Justice, and it concentrates mostly on guns. Zero hedge, Europe will lose billions of revenue if U.S. military bases shut down. So the military said that the army is going to remove all the personnel from a military base ahead of closure in Germany, and that sent all the Europeans freaking out with good reason. And who the hell cares? Soldiers in Germany, what the hell are they going to do? Right? The NATO boundary is pushed way into Ukraine, or practically into Ukraine. And so if you're going to deploy U.S. forces against a presumed Russian threat, shouldn't they be in Eastern European countries? Maybe. Just the news, Ukraine witness helped with 2016 and 2020 assessments on Russian meddling. Now he's backpedaling. In other words, he lied. Gavin Wild, who now works at think tanks in the nation's capital, co-authored the flawed January 2017 intelligence community assessment on Russian meddling in the 2016 election prior to serving on the Trump National Security Council. And he has also said that he worked on intelligence assessment on alleged Russian influence efforts on the election as well. So, but his testimony was key to the impeachments, and now he's saying that what he testified to was false. Zero hedge, China tried to assert dominance over Canada after Carney trade deal. So the Chinese, obviously, Canada is practically a vassal state of the Chinese communist. It is of the UK, but the UK has also been, because the Europeans agreed long time ago that we're going to fold up under a Chinese hegemonic power, and we're going to do away with Western democracies and particularly capitalism. But Trump says America, you're going to have to see about that. America doesn't want that, obviously. Hollywood Reporter, AI revolution. And just going back quickly to Carney in Canada, they let the Chinese military conduct winter warfare training in northern Canada. They allowed Chinese scientists come in and steal dangerous pathogens, including coronavirus, out of their Winnipeg lab. Not to mention that Justin Trudeau says, oh, I admire Xi Jinping. He's quite the dictator. Yep. Hollywood Reporter, AI revolutionary, the AI revolution Hollywood feared is already happening in India. With no unions to slow down the collision and scant regulation to cushion the aftermath, India has become the world's most consequential live experiment in AI filmmaking, and the result may preview the future of cinema everywhere. This is what the studios in America were pushing for before the Screen Actors Guild and others said you can't use our likenesses as AI fictitious or AI generated CIG. Because you don't need to pay actors if you could just put them in digitally. That's exactly what was happening, and then the unions got involved. But it's happening in India. And it's happening in a lot of American movies too, but they have to be closely monitored, and it's mostly with like action figures and stuff like that. Because the original writing in the contract was you can't mimic my likeness. Well, so they just create somebody out of whole cloth, and they don't need to pay an actor. New York Times AI bots told scientists how to make biological weapons. Scientists shared transcripts with the Times in which chatbots describe how to assemble deadly pathogens and unleash them in public spaces. Oh, isn't that heartwarming? It's the same thing I said about shooters, mass shooters. First, it's the sock puppets telling them how to do it online, and now it's AI. It's the same thing with scientists. You know, we know where this AI thing is, this trend is going. Very, very, very bad news. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. You can find me on live broadcasts every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. around there for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, Facebook, X. And you can also find me on social media, Get Our Minds, through social, Substack. All right, thanks for joining me today. Sorry to keep you so long, but, you know, I had that hiatus for 4 days or so, and kind of fell out of practice. So thanks for joining me today. We'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
These people are crazy.
New World Order.
Crazy. You're crazy. I like you. You're crazy.